Peace and blessings, family. This is your boy Gerald. It is the 6th of February, 2018. How is everybody doing? I hope that you guys had a enjoyable, restful, peaceful weekend. For those who are into sports, you enjoyed the Super Bowl. Was it not exciting? Shout out to the Philadelphia Eagles and those who support your team. They represented. They were holding the banner of the underdog, and they represented and captured their ring. Congratulations. For this video here today, I actually feel some some kind of way because in the distance I, like so many, take note and I watch. And I've noticed in the last 2 to 3 years that there's been a momentum of people wanting to know their history so that they could have clarity about not only their direction, but their legacy. And quite often we've heard people always use this metaphor: to know your future, you must know your past. And how that has an impact socially in the climate that we know today. On one side, you have those that are waving the banner of peace, harmony, and communication. And then on the other side, there is perplex, there is distraction, there is fear. And it made me think, because no matter what your social media platform that you frequent, you will find countless testimonials of people finding courage to take the first step to research their lineage. And then there are some that won't take things for face value, not to condemn those folks, but to go a little deeper. As you've heard me through the years, I've always echoed that God, the Most High, the Alpha and the Omega, He uses history as a tool to teach, to correct. That is His way of telling man, do you understand? Do you understand what I'm showing you? And allowing free will to be claimed. This is what defines our truth. This is also what gives clarity. Because you cannot have truth without acknowledging what exists in your current situation, or what we deem as the living constant. And what I mean by living constant, that is that constant example, effect that always tends to demand for you to acknowledge its presence. That's nothing but God using His angels, because angels are real. Don't get it twisted. And unfortunately, demons continue to do the will of the beast, the lion in the brush, waiting to devour, to destroy. That is why we live in 2018 and the Jezebel spirit is so destructive. Her number one tool has and will always be is to destabilize what you find sacred, starting with your home. The people that you're connected to by blood and bone, family, directly or indirectly connected. Not to stray off topic, but I had to add that to the foundation of this video because it seems now more than ever there's a momentum, I believe spiritually being driven, that people are questioning for whence do I come from? And countless times the question has been requested, been pondered, to sometimes fall on deaf ears. This is something I don't take lightly because this is something that, as a grown man, spiritual man, but I can go back to my early childhood and gazing upon the mirror and looking at my reflection and wondering, why did I look the way I did? Why was my hair the way it was? Why was my nose perfectly placed on my face? Why my eyes changed colors? And why my ears were properly placed where they were? And as I grew and had access to different family members that looked just like me and those who didn't, I still understood the kinship that connected us all, the blood. That was 30 plus years ago. And as we advance through society, the things that we should hold sacred have been forgotten, have been left vulnerable, or not demanded to be embraced amongst us all. They say now more than ever, the average person can research or acknowledge at least 4 generations back. But due to social climate, economic change, the family structure has been tested. Marriages don't last till death do you part. And infidelity becomes a factor. But that has no bearing on the child. Never have, never will. Because it always goes back to the lineage. And the one thing that I had come to learn as a young boy, I used to hear it all the time. When it comes to family, it's about each one, teach one. And not all family is going to have the same blood as you, but they're connected to you by spirit. And it made me think, with the fact that we have so much at our hand, we have the cell phone, we have the laptop, we have technology aiding in seeking knowledge, but yet still, when it comes to your history, that is still unknown. Now, let me throw this disclaimer out real quick, because for some, this ain't nothing. You know, you can go back and whoever was the matriarch or the patriarch of your family tree, someone archived it. It used to be historically that for every birth, for every death, somebody in that family chronicalized it in the Bible, because most Bibles have an option where there's the family tree in there, and it was updated when needed. Fast forward 35 years, we have the internet. We have more means now to communicate and less when it comes to restriction. But yet we don't take advantage of it. But yet the doubts and the distance is even more great. And I couldn't understand that. And then, because God makes a way when there is no way, I happened to see a video by a guy named Dane Calloway. And all that did was light a fire or reignite the passion to know about my history. Now, I'm saying this for a couple reasons, because one thing that is evident through science, they've already indicated within the next 35 to 40 years, this sacred ground we know as Earth will be more melanated. This is a fact. But I also think that this also validates history, because sooner or later, all things return back for whence it came. Which brings me back to my main point. I see far too many times that people make really just take the first step to research. It used to be 30 something years ago, if you really wanted to know your lineage, you had to go to your local office of statistics. And then, depending on how passionate you were and had the means, you could always take a trip to Washington, D.C., my home, and go to the National Archives and go in there. And back then, it used to be just a huge room of rooms with hard maple chairs, a big old desk, and you could sit down and go through the archives, or depending on the age, it was already compressed and compiled on microfilm. I remember as a little boy, my mom, we did that a couple times. I remember that like it was yesterday. But little did my mom know. Because the one thing about children, A child's innocence automatically generates truth. And that is why it's always said that children can be brutal, because they're only going to go off of what they know, what the example is, what is being nurtured. But not to stray off topic, I remember, and I've shared this before. I remember I was like 5 years old, and I remember my great great grandmother was over at my grandmother's apartment, and at that time, my grandmother was playing an old. Well, it wasn't old at the time, but she was playing a James Brown song called "I'm Black and I'm Proud." And for those who've heard that song, the hook is "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." Well, being that young, not really understanding, you mimic what you hear. And I remember on that day that my great grandmother was sitting in the chair, and my great grandmother had long, silverish gray hair, I mean, down her back. And being a young lad, I used to play in it, like most little kids do. I try to brush her hair, didn't know any better. But what was significant about that day, as that song was playing, I more or less mimicked the words. And the only thing I could remember was at that age is "I'm black, proud." And I remember my great grandmother, she smacked me. She smacked me in the face. And I was shocked because I'm like, what are that? You're basically a toddler, you don't know what you're doing. And she grabbed me softly and caressed my face. And she said, "There's no such thing as a black person. There's only 5 shades of brown." And that stuck with me all my life. As growing up, like most, through your grammar school days and your middle school days, your high school days, and even when you were in school, one of the main questions I always was asked was, "What are you?" And I would look the same, like, "Huh? What are you? Are you Hispanic? You look Puerto Rican." Because living in Washington, D.C., you had a diverse community. You had people from all over. And usually, where you lived at, you found a high populace of that demographic. I would always say, "I'm black," because that was what was infused into my mentality. Now, let me throw this disclaimer out real quick, and then I'm going to step away real quick because I got to have my coffee. So give me a second. I want to throw this disclaimer out because this is not about playing the race card. This is not about isolating a certain demographic. It's not. This video is all about making the decision to invest in you. How can you invest in you if you don't know you? Or better yet, how are you going to understand what is being presented in front of you if you don't know what you're standing on, what you're about? More or less, how are you going to understand where you're headed unless you know where you're from? This is something that many demographics, especially today, they battle with that inside. They don't talk about this at home. They're afraid to have this discussion. Why? If it's about being proud, not prideful, why won't you embrace who you are? Because there's only one you. You were made perfect. And depending on how long it will take and for how many experiences or how many disappointments that you are going to have to face, guess what happens? Eventually, you got to come back home, metaphorically or spiritually, because it starts with you and it's going to end with you. And you take that last breath too. But let me stop right now. Allow me to go get my coffee, and I'll be right back. almost done. One more. All right, I'm back. Thank you for your patience. Got my coffee. But I feel a certain kind of way because, I've been doing a lot of reading, and I can't stress this. This is not about judgment. This is all about awareness. And the one thing I stand on, truth cannot be suppressed by time. Mm-mm. That's why God always said, what's done in the dark comes to the light. But it takes courage to acknowledge what is present. We're talking about you. Who are you? What do you stand for? Is it based off of fear or is it based off of transparency? See, that's the problem that for some reason gets overlooked. It never gets confronted. And I don't mean act out bad behavior. I'm talking about true empowerment. So you got to look at history. You got to. But the real question that should be asked is for those people that know, what are you so afraid of? Why is it such a momentum to be progressive as if you want to hide for whence you came? You can't. It's imperative that you acknowledge who you are. And I really believe in my heart that 50% of a person's identity is made up of not only perceptions, ideologies, and what has been embraced. These narratives, but with those narratives, are we critically thinking? Are we actually investigating, or are we just taking what is being spoon fed? You do understand there are some people that are laughing. They're laughing. Oh, yeah, they're laughing because it's right in your face and you don't see it because you're allowing your social distractions to blind. Or is it fear that's keeping you from acknowledging what is evident? This is only something that you can answer. But if you decide to just stand, take note, critically think, the truth will reveal itself in the intended time. That's what God gives man. Remember, the two spiritual gifts you were given the moment you took your first breath was this: unconditional love. If you don't love yourself, you can't expect the world to love you back because you won't be able to understand what love is, which means you must critically think. And number two, free will. Should I go right? Should I go left? Should I stand still? Or should I go forth and travel the road less traveled? Because the reward is your life story. Who am I talking to? Do you realize the effect of not claiming who you are also dictates your financial expectancy as an individual? How can you know what is of value and worth if you do not investigate or invest in you? I know that for some that'll go in one ear and out the other because you think or have convinced yourself through examples of disappointment. Well, this is the best I'm going to ever be, Gerald. This is what I've come to know. So I put my parameters around that and I make my margins as needed. Or you can choose to speak your truth. Decide to go within and love yourself more. Sometimes God will even put you in a position where it's so close, but it has nothing to do with you, just to give you the right to learn the insight of the experience. That's not your battle, that's theirs. Who am I talking to? But you feel that though, don't you? You feel it. Why? Because it's meant for you to receive that information. It's meant for you to learn from that so you don't have that misfortune. But let's go back to the main point. Let's talk about history. The one thing that I've noticed in this last year and a half, and I didn't speak on it, and I don't know, maybe because of the fact that there was insecurities for myself, because for those who've seen my videos, you know my story. One of my greatest setbacks, my greatest challenge as a man, for 25 years, I suffered with low self low self-esteem. Oh yeah, I did. And that was nothing but a step to place me in impulsive decisions, align myself where I thought false security was, or false love for someone else's agenda. Who am I talking to? And I can smile now because I can tell you for at least 10 years, I could not. I wasn't crazy. I just wasn't challenging myself to seek truth. But I'm a firm believer that God positions you, that everything that you ever wanted to know, it will be given. Not until you ask for it. And that's within yourself. So let's go back to why I made this video. Cheers. One of the things that plagued me as a young boy growing up was not the fact of accepting, because that is a big problem in society still to this day. You have children being reared in environments where they feel they don't belong. And so it is human behavior to seek love out, even if that is putting them at risk. That is why you see this still in 2018. Gangs are rampant. Drugs are prevalent. And denial is the ever example. Why? Why are we so afraid to speak truth? Why is it so hard for us to just admit to ourselves, I don't know? But we quick to embrace the lie. We're quick to go into the burning building, then assess the threat. Why? Why? Why is this such a romanticized mindset when the payout is pain? I believe it's because far too many people are oblivious of who they are. So to go back to the story of me being young and I'm in the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and my mom is researching. She's researching our history. And I remember my mom spending hours and hours going through that microfiche, and I'm sitting at this hard, I'm assuming it was mahogany desk, and those library chairs that I don't know why they were built to last, but they weren't built for comfort. And trying to keep myself entertained, but being quiet because that was like a library environment. And I remember one day my mom, after I think it was like the third day of my mom going there, and she was able to find a connection, and she pointed it out, and it said, I don't remember if it was a female or if it was a male, but it was indicated that they were colored on the archive, but they were listed as assets to this person. So back in the slave time, if you had slaves, they weren't chronicalized under the household. They were chronicalized with the livestock. Now, I'm stating this for a significant reason, and I'm going to bring it back. So we put a period on that. Fast forward 10, 15 years. And meanwhile, I'm in elementary, middle school. I'm in my grammar school days. And like I said, kids are very brutal. So I didn't get accepted by the demographic that I should. And I didn't get accepted by those who didn't look like me. And that's a problem that a lot of children today that are biracial or they are scrutinized by their complexion. And let me throw it out there, because even though we don't want to talk about it, I'm talking about the melanated community. When it comes to racism and bias and bigotry, that is more prevalent in our own community amongst ourselves, as well as it is in other demographics. See, other demographics, they didn't have the brown bag test. And this is nothing but a reflection of what was deemed back in the slave times, because historically the fairer skin were closer to the house, and the darker skin were out in the field. So you already had people of the same demographic divided. I'm not even going to go on the gender. But you know what I realized? What made me ponder even back then? One thing that was still prevalent, but you don't speak on, is human behavior. And what I mean by that is human beings are human beings, no matter what the social narrative is going on, is how they deal. But you can't tell me, even back then, that there was no slave, there was no infidelity going on. There was no, you know, even though the mindset of we got to stick together because you had no choice because the overseer who looked like us, he's thinking about his life, ain't thinking about yours. But you can't tell me from a human perspective that there was no promiscuous behavior by both, as well as historical fact that some of those plantation owners were raping the men, mm-hmm, were raping the children, as well as Miss Miriam sitting on the pedestal, overseeing the economic growth of the plantation owner. She wasn't getting attention. So what did she do? She went out and found a suitor in the field or someone in the house. Meanwhile, we'll say Mr. Jeffrey, he, after a drunken stupor or even out of the audacity of control, because a lot of it was control driven. He was sleeping with whoever because he could. And that trauma lived through the generations. Still to this day, there are people that emphatically find pride of, well, my family owns your family. Have no problem speaking that claim because historically it was. Now, I put that to the side. Like I said, this isn't about judgment. This is about historical fact. So the last 2 weeks, I've been doing a lot of research. And one thing that stuck out for me is I saw how regentrification had an effect on the development of family trees, legacy lines, lineage. And just to bring this in better context, I found out that for 55 years, the state of Virginia, in which where I live, would threaten those that were deemed Native Americans to denounce their heritage. And if they did not, they would threaten them with jail time, or you just came up missing. Or better yet, rights to your property. And it's a historical fact that all up and down the East Coast, a lot of Native American communities lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. But the government won't tell you that. They'll give you a plaque, they'll make a landmark, but they won't speak truth. And I always thought that was kind of weird. So when I see people doing these, what is it, DNA uh, lineage tests, you know the brands out there, they're running the commercials. They run them just about every day. You pick the brand, but it's the same scientific uh, scientific test. And the one thing that I always heard people saying when they got their results back was this: I'm a certain percentage of this, right? And then when it says the African connection, it was always the 3 to 4 countries always came up as the listing, even though the continent of Africa has numerous countries in it. And I know we can be political and say, well, you know what, Gerald, that wasn't the name of that. So they basically geographically are just throwing that in the equation, right? Okay. But what is the odds out of the 77.4 billion people that that marker comes up? It's always Bali, Tobago. Um, and when they talk about the continent of Africa, there's always Mali, Ivory Coast. It's always those common five. How is that possible? The continent of Africa has millions and millions of people. How is that possible? Or better yet, how are you able to have a direct link, not only through generations, because you're going to have a constant strand to have accuracy. I don't understand that. And this is the one that really gets me too. So then you hear, um, well, I'm certain percentage European, Irish. Um, they'll you know, and they'll throw Russian in the mix and stuff. But you know what you don't never hear people talk about? And I really believe because either some do know and won't speak on it, and then a lot of times people just don't know, is they don't acknowledge the Moors. The Moors were your original navigators of this planet. And guess what? They were, as you would call, well, they were melanated. You wouldn't have the plotting of the land masses without the Moors. And the Moors, guess what? They dominated and occupied what you know as Europe, the Northern Hemisphere. They had that on lock. That's why when you hear metaphoric child songs, stories, like, for example, um, St. Patrick's Day. And St. Patrick was known for what? Driving the snakes away. Who do you think they were talking about? Driving the black snakes out. But if you run into a typical Irish person through likeness, what you see? 9 times out of 10, fiery attitude, like to fight, very loud, but loyal to their bloodline. Same with Spain. The Moors had Europe, what we know as Europe, Russia. They had that on lock for over 1,000 years. So that goes back to what the Bible was talking about, the original 12 tribes, right? Where do you think them 12 tribes went? Huh? Think about it. And for those that are scientific, what does your skin do when you go into an environment that is foreign? It adapts. It has to. Because if it doesn't, you die. So the closer to the equator, the browner your skin gonna be. The further from the equator, the lighter it becomes. And the first indicator of that climate change is what? Your hair. Your hair. Don't believe me? Think about all the different types of species that are known in that geographical area, but are found in another. You look at it, that's a cat, but they call it something else. But that's a cat. Because at one time, the land masses were together. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. And if we want to go scientific even more, we can also acknowledge that you had, for those that want to look at it from a hunter and gatherer perspective, where you think those hunters went? They traveled and followed the food source. In turn, that they took their customs and traditions with them. Why would they not? It's what they know. It's who they are. Why don't we acknowledge them? And here's a good one, and I'm gonna get off of that soapbox. You don't believe me? Watch this. Two different demographics, but they look the same. You look at the typical Samoan, right? And you look at their customs. I'm not talking about the modernized generation. I'm talking about the traditional folk, right? You got that in your head. Well, how coincidental is those that were from the Pacific realm, those islands, and those customs? What about the people in New Zealand? Do they not look the same? And we can also zero that into this. Direct descendants of Aboriginal influence and bloodline. Why is it that we don't embrace that? So to bring it to speed, I shake my head because this is what I've always questioned. Like people that are of Latin influence. Does it not strike you that when you look at the landmarks, you look at the structures to remind you of where? Continent of Africa. I think just this week they found artifacts, land structures in South America. Pyramids, family. Pyramids. You go all over the world. Why aren't we looking at it from a basic perspective as 1 and 1 equals 2, not 6? It's all about embracing who you are. But if you ask the average person today, they don't know their family. They don't know them. You can grab your phone and DM somebody, instant message somebody, unlike having the restrictions. See, I was raised when you only had a phone. You were sitting at the mailbox waiting for a letter to come. That's when people were more tight. Now, all you got to do is get online and boop, real time. There they are. Why aren't we, why aren't we, why aren't we embracing that? Why we're all about evolution. Why aren't we embracing that tech? And I'm gonna bring this back home and I've said enough. Here's another thing that really caused me to ponder for literally for the last 3 weeks. I know for a fact that in my bloodline, there's Native American blood in me. I already know that because I remember my great grandmother. I remember her. And I remember the nuances of examples in my grandmother's house and some of the things she would do from a holistical standpoint. Oh, we kept a cactus in our house. My grandmother, she had a cactus. She had an aloe vera plant. She had all these what we would call um, old wives remedies. But those remedies, you never got sick. You know, like they say, kids naturally bounce. Yeah, yeah. They're not as contaminated as they are today. You wasn't hearing about such and such has leukemia or such and such is been diagnosed with uh, muscular sclerosis or various ailments out there. You didn't hear about people having cervical cancer. You didn't hear about people having strokes and heart attacks. And if you did, it was so isolated that the community stopped and took note because it was like an anomaly. Why? And you know what else we didn't have back then that we are having now? We didn't have the distractions that we embrace. People walking around don't even know where they're going. People in their vehicles driving to nowhere just to park, just to drive right in front of you with no turn signal. Who am I talking to? You know, you've seen that. Treating the highways like it's a NASCAR tryout. Hmm? And you look over and they got their cell phone in one hand, something in the other. But all in all, if we are advancing as a community, we cannot evolve as an individual until we decide to do the work. And I really believe that's why a lot of traditions get lost. Because let's make this crystal clear. You know what is uh, going on in a town near you, in a city near you, in a state near you right now? They're shutting down your libraries. Who am I talking to? They're killing funding for that. So what happens? Eventually, those books get destroyed. How is it possible that a book can be deemed outdated? How is that possible? But they're doing it. Unless there is something prolific in those books that they don't want you to know. And there are some people that are trying to rewrite history. Don't get it twisted. And it's sad because guess what? Devil's work's not done, family. It's not. But if you don't know who you are, don't worry about where you're going because you have yet to see what matters inside to protect it. You got all these people talking about, I'm awoke. I'm awoke. Stay awake. That's a joke. That's a joke. Those are emotional trigger words because these same people don't practice what they preach. And you see it because they are dysfunctional in their behavior. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of them just don't love themselves. So misery loves company too. And that is the ultimate travesty. So I've been doing this research and for myself, but for those who have followed my channel, and I thank you. You're the reason why I do it. Is because I, in my heart, in my spirit, want to be prepared so that on that given day, when I'm able to sit down and have that heart-to-heart conversation with my beloved daughter, I can tell her what her heritage is. Now, keep in mind, you have some people that want to forget. They don't want to visit that because that may have a connection to an emotional disappointment. Let's not get it twisted to the people that are born in they're conceived from an unfortunate event like sexual assault, incest, or the fact that mom, even though she was young, she had a father that did not want to be a father. This happens all the time, family. Children don't have the right to pick their parents. And you see it in their development by the choices that they make. And a lot of it is because they're running from their pain. They're running. You ask them where you're going, they don't know where they're going, but they're habitually loyal to the drama, to the chaos. I had somebody tell me one time, y'all ready for this? She actually told me in conversation, she said, well, Gerald, if a man doesn't disrespect me, call me a bitch or call me out of my name, or if he don't strong arm me, then he don't love me. I looked at her, I said, how long you been carrying that concussion? Because you obviously have been misled. But what would go down was that was the example that she was reared from because she saw her mom do that. She saw her sisters do that. That's why, Kings, I say to you, you don't have to have a relationship with the mother of your child, but be damn sure you have one with your babies. Otherwise, don't complain in who they become because you failed them. You failed them. Don't get off your high horse and say, well, you know what? She didn't screw the whole block and she got all these kids. Ain't nobody raising them, but I got to pay for them because it's my tax dollars. It's still your flesh and blood. She is a living example of what you stand for. You don't believe me? Why you think we got paternity court? Why you think we got Maury and all those ratchet tabloid TVs out there? Why? Because they laughing at you and they're making a profit only to repeat the cycle over and over and over again. When does the cycle end? The moment you decide to love yourself. You think being a tough guy makes you a man? You think, females, that because as long as you turn the octave on your voice, they're going to respect you? Nobody going to respect you until you decide to respect yourself. Well, Gerald, I'm not into commitment. I don't want to commit. I date around. That's what I do. Meanwhile, you sharing your DNA with someone that don't deserve to hear you breathe and won't be there when you need them. And worse, will never marry you. So who's taking the wear and tear? I'm talking about the emotional scars. Those are the ones that heal, will take time to heal. But you can come through it. You can. And anybody said that you can't, they lying. You know why? Because they don't want you to. They want you to sulk. They want you to stay imbalanced. They want you to stay impulsive because guess what? Indirectly, you ain't a threat. So let me bring this home. The one thing that I thought was just mind blowing is like I was going to say, like the Latino community. This is no shade on you. I have love for everybody. But how do you know a person is of a culture until they open their mouth or show you an example of? But for someone that does not know, they deem you as either one or two things. Either you're white or you're black. Or here you go. I'm Puerto Rican. That's a demographic. That's a cultural influence. And then you have some people that have been taught through family lineage. No, don't acknowledge that. Don't do it. I can't acknowledge, but that's who you are. And here's the funny thing about it. Some of the other demographics, they don't care about that. They embrace their culture. And that's why they're closer knit. And until we as a people do the work individually, stop asking about marching. Stop asking for protesting. Stop waving your fist because they're laughing at you. Because they know one thing's for sure. You ain't making a stride to put yourself forward. So why should they take you serious? They look exactly at your communities. And that's why the top 1% don't stop moving. They're making money off your pain. And they love the fact that you remain ignorant. Why? Because you're afraid. Is that what it is? You're afraid to be you? Or is it deep down inside? Deep down inside, you just want to be loved. You want to feel emotionally safe. That's when them peaceful nights come. One of the greatest illusions ever pulled off by capitalism is to convince the community to find peace is you have to take a vacation. You're supposed to have a vacation every time you come home. Because where you lay your head, that should be your sanctity. I'm just saying. But yeah, so I'm doing research and I know that I'm not the only one. And I know that historically, there's a lot of truth not being revealed. Like, for example, the Census Bureau is flawed. Historically has been flawed because they're not properly listing demographics for their heritage. They're not. There was always been you're white or you're black. Now, and keep this in mind, because I hate saying this, but some people just won't accept this. But I gotta show you. Matter of fact, this is a good example. There's no such thing as a white person. There's no such thing as a black person. The lightest complexion on this planet is albino. The darkest complexion on this planet is the people of Sudan, which validates my point. There's only 5 shades of brown, and you'll find your complexion in that hue. No different than a prism. What's the greatest emphasis of a prism? Darkness, because the darkness absorbs the light. Now, y'all that's rocking that LGBT, they're laughing at you too. They laughing because you don't realize that rainbow, if you put it together, at all the colors of the demographic on this planet, you know what it does? It makes light. It makes light. So as long as we stay splintered, as long as we don't invest in ourselves, as long as we do not accept our uniqueness, you're going to be lost. And they're going to let you stay out there too. They're going to let you stay out there until you decide to come home. Come home to yourself because you deserve it. I would love to hear from you guys, get your feedback. And I just thought it was just crazy because, you know, you've got these companies out here and you don't even realize your DNA is pretty much building a profile of who you are. They don't have to worry about your economic behaviors. That's what algorithms are for. No different than being online. What you watch, what you don't watch. You think that information is not getting stored? It has to. You remember this thing called the Patriot Act? Because we have bad people on this planet that only want to destabilize your life and have you living in fear, which ultimately makes you a drone, aimlessly walking through life being a consumer. Well, guess what? Everything you do, it's archived. But that Census Bureau, it is a known fact that it was biased, especially the last 60 years, because they were deliberately not acknowledging Native Americans, indigenous people. How about that? If you're a native, that means you local. Your origin is of that land. And when you look up the definition, look it up. It'll tell you this: people of copper, bronze complexion, like the tobacco. Maybe that's why their leaves were the way they were, as their headdress. You ever thought about that? It's right in front of you. Right in front of you, family. Protect your legacy by investing in it. And watch what you'll be seeing and shown. You're worth it. Be blessed.